In order to pass Pennsylvania State inspection, I needed to replace the rusted out rockers on my 2001 Chevy Silverado. These are odd rockers in that the lower pinch weld is horizontal rather than vertical like most other vehicles of that era. An outfit called Classic 2 Current Fabrications supplies a pair of slip-on replacements for just $67.57 through Amazon. These are 78 inches long and made to fit all cab configurations. For my standard cab, I needed to cut them to length. These can be attached by welding or by using steel countersunk pop rivets. I need to emphasize to use steel rivets. Using aluminum rivets will create a battery and quickly rust the steel. The first step was to cut out the rusted metal. An angle grinder with a metal cutting blade did a great job. I don't think I used more than 5 out of a 10-disc pack. I used a pry bar and hammer to remove the remaining material from the pinch weld. I switched to 80 grit flap discs, which were purchased from Amazon. They came in a package of 10 for just $17.90, and I didn't use more than 5 on the entire project. That means both sides. These were used to clean up the remaining rust the best I could, plus clean the paint from the areas I was going to weld to. It is important not to grind away any more metal than necessary, knowing that the thinner the metal, the harder it would be to weld. Notice that I have covered the door opening to protect the interior from being coated with dust. Next, I sprayed the rusted areas with Rust-Oleum Paintable Rust Converter. This is basically the same type of product as the old Naval Jelly was. I had considered extending the rocker over the rust on the rear cab corner. However, I found that I would not get a good fit, plus there probably wasn't enough metal left to weld to. I've wanted a welder for a long time, so this project gave me the excuse to purchase one. The welder plus the gloves and a 1-year damage replacement plan cost $148.96 from Northern Tool. On top of this, I added a shield for $29. If I had to do over, I would have spent a little more money for an automatic one. From the research I did before the purchase, I found the wire that comes with the welder is not the best, so I gave myself a little more advantage and purchased a spool of Lincoln Electric wire for $11.95. This brings my total welding supplies to $188.96. Since I hadn't had a welder in my hands for over 25 years, I knew some practice was needed. Plus, it is always best to do some testing before welding anything. I cut 2 pieces from the waste end of the new rocker. I needed to find the best size for the plug weld holes, so I drilled the top piece with many holes from 1/4 inch to 5/16 inch, thus allowing me to determine what is best for the 18 gauge metal and the .030 flux core wire. Using the same process here I intended to use on the truck, I secured the top piece through the use of hex washer sheet metal screws. These are number 10 by 1/2 inch. I simply drilled an 1/8 inch hole through several of the plug weld holes and screwed them together. Here is my finished test piece. The rusted out pinch weld area needed to be fixed so that I had something to weld to. So I cut a length of metal from the scrap end of the new rocker, hammered it into an angle, and drilled spot weld holes. The holes were then taped over on the back side before undercoating. My fear was that if I didn't keep the metal around the holes clean, that the undercoating would contaminate the weld. The piece was clamped into position. I marked the weld location, and then using 80 grit paper, I removed the undercoating. I needed bare metal in order for the welder to strike a proper arc. The piece was clamped back into position and welded. Welds were cleaned and ground smooth. A liberal coat of undercoating was applied. I used mineral spirits and a green pad to clean the bare metal. Next came a coat of self-etching primer. This stuff is really important for good paint adhesion. After the primer dried, I applied a liberal coat of undercoating to the back side. After allowing the undercoating to thoroughly dry on the back side, using a ruler, I drew a straight line across the top edge and then marked off every 2 inches. Each mark was then center punched. I piloted the holes with an 1/8 inch bit, then followed up, as I remember it, with a 9/32 inch bit. I think the 1/4 inch weld hole was too small, and anything over 5/16 is too large. Using the 80 grit flap disc, I then smoothed off the drill spurs on the reverse side, plus a little of the undercoating. Then I applied some etching primer to the bare spots. As I did with the test panel, I drilled 1/8 inch holes through the plug weld hole and attached the rocker using number 10 sheet metal screws with hex washer heads. I spaced the screws out just enough to give me a good fit. If attaching the rocker using steel pop rivets, you would be drilling 1/8 inch holes and following up with a countersink bit. I probably wouldn't bother using a countersink rivet on the pinch weld. Again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of using a steel rivet. On the pinch weld, I used a combination of both screws and rivets. Don't be afraid to persuade the metal to fit. Each time before welding a plug, I clip off the end of the wire so that it is sharp and makes good contact on the first pull of the trigger. You may question why I have a common working glove on my right hand and a welding one on my left. Using a common glove makes it easier to move the torch around. The welding glove is closest to the arc and used as a prop, taking the brunt of the abuse. I trigger the torch quite a bit to help eliminate burn through. The screws are removed. These holes are a bit more difficult to fill because you are already burned through. So as you can see, the practice panel was very important in helping me learn how to control the torch. Finishing up, I ground the weld smooth and applied etching primer. Next, there was a bead of paintable caulk applied and then another coat of primer. The pinch welds were sprayed both top and bottom with a liberal coating of undercoating. After all this dries, we're ready for the paint. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please post them and I'll certainly respond to you. Make it a great day, and thanks for watching.